Hello and welcome to the Warner household. My name is Ron Warner and I've got my son and daughter Nate and Liz with me today. Just before we get started, I just want to kind of go over how we're going to do the Sunday school lesson. I've got all the verses up here on the board that Nate and Liz are going to go ahead and read, and we'll talk through each one of them as we do that. The lesson today is going to be over God gives Solomon wisdom. This is the main verse right here, 1 Kings 2, 1 through 4, in chapter 3, 3 through 15. So before we get into today's lesson, I just want to talk a little about what possibly you did last week in a video. Does anybody remember? So last week's lesson was God forgives David. So that's a really neat lesson. If you didn't watch it, go ahead, go back and take a look at it. But David was a man after God's own heart, but like all of us, was weak. And within what happened, I counted 7 commandments that he broke in that situation from the lesson last week. His sin was not greater than God's forgiveness, though. And was it painful? Yeah, it really was. And it caused scars too. But God brought David back in a relationship to himself, and God's overall plan continued towards Christ coming to earth. So David was an amazing king, an amazing individual. But as I just said, that was a horrible thing that he went through. But God's grace and God's forgiveness brought him back to him. And so today we're going to talk about God gives Solomon wisdom. And then next week, God's glory fills the temple. So that's the one to be looking forward to, as God's glory fills the temple. But today we're going to talk about Solomon and his wisdom. So Solomon was King David's son. Solomon we know a lot about because we talk about him being very wise, and we're going to get into where that wisdom came from and what wisdom really means. And Solomon, being David's son, was first in line for the kingship. So it was real important for Solomon to do things correctly, and we're going to talk about how David prepped his son Solomon to become an amazing king. So we're going to go ahead and start with the scripture reading. So Nate, if you can go ahead and read 1 Kings 2, 1 through 4.
When David's time to die drew near, he commanded Solomon his son, saying, I am about to go the way of all the earth. Be strong and show yourself a man, and keep the charge of the Lord your God, walking in his ways and keeping his statutes, his commandments, his rules, and his testimonies, as it is written in the laws of Moses, that you may prosper in all that you do and wherever you turn.
So there's a whole lot in those 4 verses. So Solomon, when he took over as king, he was 20 years old. It's pretty amazing. 20 years old. Most people are in their maybe second year of college, maybe. And he reigned until he was 59 years old. So within there, you hear about people talking about what's the last thing that they usually say on their deathbed? The most important thing, right? And so King David was talking to Solomon, and he was telling him the most important thing that there is before David moves on and goes to heaven. So do you think these were important words? You betcha. They were very important. So Liz, could you go ahead and read 1 Peter 2, 9 through 12.
But you are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, his own special people, that you may proclaim the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his marvelous light, who once were not a people but are now the people of God, who had not obtained mercy but now have obtained mercy. Beloved, I beg you as sojourners and pilgrims, abstain from fleshly lusts which war against the soul, having your conduct honorable among the Gentiles, that when they speak against you as evildoers, they may, by your good works which they observe, glorify God in the day of visitation.
So really cool. As King David was talking to his son Solomon, Solomon had a huge responsibility within there, and David was telling him about what they were. So we also have a responsibility within there. As Christians, people should be able to tell what kind of relationship we have with God and what's important to us by what we do and how we act and how we respond to different things. And so that's what that verse talked about. Nate, if you could go ahead and read Hebrews 8:13.
And speaking of a new covenant, he makes the first one obsolete, and what is becoming obsolete and growing old is ready to vanish away.
So within the new covenant, that's talking about Christ. So back in King David's time, Christ hadn't came yet. So within there, they were bound by a lot of rules and regulations, but they had relationship with God. And as we talked about earlier, David was brought back through forgiveness to a relationship with God. And so within the new covenant, we have a new promise through Christ of salvation. Let's see, Liz, go ahead and read 1 Corinthians 28:9.
As for you, my son Solomon, know the God of your father and serve him with a loyal heart and a willing mind. For the Lord searches all hearts and understands all the intent of the thoughts. If you seek him, he will be found by you. But if you forsake him, he will cast you off forever.
So God knows our heart. So within here, we're talking about wisdom. We're talking about what we do. And so God looks at our heart to tell how we're doing and what we should be doing if we're not doing the right thing. So Nate, could you read 1 Corinthians 29:19?
Grant to Solomon my son a whole heart, that he may keep your commandments, your testimonies, and your statutes, performing all, that he may build the palace for which I have made provision.
So this is King David praying for Solomon. And it shows the power of prayer, because King David was told by God of certain things, promises that were to take place, and Solomon is a big part of that, as far as the kingdom continuing and the temple being rebuilt. And so just how powerful is prayer, that Solomon would go to that, and the importance of, King David would go to just prayer, or go to prayer, and the importance of Solomon's role within the lineage of Jesus Christ, because that's where all of this leads, is to the birth of Christ. 1 Kings chapter 3, verse 3, Liz.
And Solomon loved the Lord, walking in the statutes of his father David, except that he sacrificed and burned incense at the high places.
So Solomon loved the Lord. That was great. That goes to show you how King David raising Solomon, how he taught him and how it nurtured Solomon's love for the Lord. But within there it says, but he sacrificed at the high places. And so what that means is they didn't have a temple yet. And so within those days they still made sacrifices, so they went to the high places. But King Solomon is going to go ahead and build that temple. Go ahead and read verse 6, Nate.
And Solomon said, You have shown great and steadfast love to your servant David my father, because he walked before you in faithfulness, in righteousness, and in uprightness of heart toward you. And you have kept for him his great and steadfast love, and have given him a son to sit on his throne this day.
So this is all about Solomon's attitude towards his father and his place and what he has to do to be faithful and successful in all of this. Liz, verse 8 and 9.
And your servant is in the midst of your people, whom you have chosen, a great people, too numerous to be numbered or counted. Therefore give your servant an understanding heart, to judge your people, that I may discern between good and evil. For who is able to judge this great people of yours?
So Solomon gets it. He sees how big the task is. There's a lot of people, there's a lot of justice that has to be done, and he wants to do it right. So he wants this wisdom to come from God, not his wisdom. Our wisdom is self-seeking, but God's wisdom is right for everybody, and it leads to a successful future for all of us. Okay? Nate, Ephesians 5:15 through 17.
Okay. Look carefully then how you walk, not as unwise, but as wise, making the best use of the time because the days are evil. Therefore do not be foolish, but understand that the will of the Lord is.
So Solomon had a responsibility to his people placed upon him by God and David and him being the king. So we also have a responsibility to be wise and walk wisely within that. Liz, Proverbs 3:5 through 8.
Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct your paths. Do not be wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord and depart from evil. It will be health in your flesh and strength in your bones.
So where does wisdom come from? It comes from the Lord. Nate, James 3:14, 15, and 17.
But if you have bitter jealousy and selfish ambition in your hearts, do not boast and be false to the truth. This is not the wisdom that comes down from above, but it is earthly, unspiritual, demonic. But the wisdom from above is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, open to reason, full of mercy and good fruits, impartial and sincere.
Wow, isn't that awesome? So the wisdom that comes from us is demonic. So building ourselves up, doing everything, the internal kind of stuff, it's not wisdom from God. God's wisdom is amazing, and it's got grace and mercy in there, and it's got intelligence beyond what we could ever do. Okay, Liz, verse 11 and 13.
Then God said to him, because you have asked this thing, and have not asked long life for yourself, nor have asked riches for yourself, nor have asked the life of your enemies, but you have asked for yourself understanding to discern justice. Behold, I have done according to your words. See, I have given you a wise and understanding heart, so that there has not been anyone like you before you, nor shall any like you arise after you. And I have also given you what you have not asked, both riches and honor, so that there shall not be anyone like you among the kings all your days.
No one like you among the kings during your days. That's incredible. Do you think Solomon really knew that he was going to ask for wisdom and God was going to grant him being rich and him having many things? That's really cool. But also, one thing that really stood out in there to me was God said you have a wise and understanding heart to ask for wisdom. So within that, there's God-given things in all of us. And so when we plug into God, those things come out and can be used for him. So Solomon already had a wise heart. It's just that by seeking God, God turned that into something amazing. So I thought that was really neat. James 1:5.
If any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask God, who gives generously to all without reproach, and it will be given to him.
So can we learn to be wise? More so earthly wisdom, but godly wisdom comes from requesting it, and it's available to everyone. So you have to request it with the right heart, and it'll be given to you. Liz, the last one, 1 Corinthians 1:30 and 31.
But of him you are in Christ Jesus, who became for us wisdom from God, and righteousness and sanctification and redemption, that as written, he who glories, let him glory in the Lord.
So what did it say Christ became?
Wisdom from God and righteousness and sanctification and
So Christ became wisdom.
Yeah.
Cool. Christ became wisdom. And I hadn't really thought about that. So Solomon asked for wisdom. And who became wisdom? Christ. So indirectly, Solomon was asking for Christ to come in his life. That's kind of neat. And so within there, if you want to be wise, Christ has to be in your heart. So Solomon, he was a great man. You know, did he have his problems? He had his problems, like his dad. His dad had problems also. But King David, you know, is quoted as a man after God's own heart. Even with sins that he committed and the issues that he had and running from Saul all those years, the line of David led to Christ. That's where Christ came from. So God's plan always works out. You know, we kind of fumble around and we goof things up, but God brings us back. He brings us back to the right relationship within Him. So I hope you enjoyed today's Sunday school lesson. Once again, my name is Ron Warner, and Nate and Liz Warner helped out. So I hope y'all have a great Sunday. Thank you.